Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming today to PWBM's sixth elective course in the certificate program for policy professionals. I'm Sophia. I'm the program coordinator at PWBM. And today we have Rich Prisinzano, the director of policy analysis, presenting on comprehensive analysis of the Biden platform. So here comes the presentation. We'll do a Q&A as usual afterwards. Feel free to post your questions in the Q&A session during the presentation or after we wrap up during the discussion. So handing it off to Rich. Thanks, Rich.
Great. Thanks, Sophia. I will add that it's not just the comprehensive Biden analysis. We actually have as much of the Trump policy platform analyzed as we could, which you'll see at the end. We have a couple things there. So yeah, kind of jumping straight into it here. The way we handled the Biden campaign platform is something I to my knowledge has not been done before, where we considered all of the policies associated with the campaign in one model. Typically you see something like analysis of the tax pieces or analysis of particular spending pieces, say healthcare or education spending, and those likely effects. Here, what we've done is we've taken all of those things, so the tax pieces and the spending pieces, and put them together and look at sort of what that net effect is, or what that comprehensive effect is. And as we'll get into it, it's the spending, rather than just it being quote unquote wasteful government spending. We're going to allow the spending to be productive to the extent that education spending or infrastructure spending is good for the economy. We let that kind of flow through our model, and then we get our results. So when we started to do the Biden, we kind of for exposition, we kind of want to break it down into categories, and we've broken it up into 8 pieces here. So let me. So the first one is immigration, and this is. The current administration has done a couple things to kind of to slow immigration, and then of course there's the pandemic, and those things have reduced immigration. What the Biden campaign has kind of put forward is that they want to bring those levels back up. They do have, based on some bills that were proposed under the Obama administration, that there's this path to legal status. And then some of the things that the campaign has said they do is kind of undo some of the executive orders that Trump has done, like limitations on H-1B and things like that. So that first piece is just sort of immigration, kind of returning it to historic levels, and then a path to legal status for folks. Second piece is tax. This is kind of our bread and butter for the most part. And here the campaign has increased taxes or aimed taxes at corporations and high income folks, which we'll get into some details, but raising rates on corporations and then those high income earners. Third piece is education. Here we're sort of expanding access to education through some free college education, preschool education. Also some spending on things like underprivileged schools. So particular schools in sort of at-risk areas, they've got a plan to spend some money there. And again, we let that flow through the model. Then we sort of have the infrastructure and R&D, and here is a kind of a distinction we make, where if a colleague, Cody, who's here with us, it's kind of gone through and made sure that we don't double count their spending. So you might see that the Biden campaign says something about their climate projects or climate proposals or green projects separate from infrastructure. Here we're putting them together because we found that they kind of double counted things. So investment in things like water, other sort of projects count in for the Biden campaign in both those things, and so we have a little bit less spending than they say they do. But this also includes things like working towards sort of clean energy and things like that, which is what we would call just R&D. There's not a specific thing that they know will work. It's kind of again, it's a research and then development of those things. The fifth piece is housing. Again, this is the campaign has come forth to say that, they want to make housing more affordable. So they've got an expansion of low-income housing tax credits. And then they've also got a program that will reduce the cost of or the burden of housing for renters and owners. There's a first-time home buyer credit, and there's also rental housing or house allowance fund that they set up to kind of reduce that burden for folks. We have the Social Security, which is the current system. It just takes the beneficiaries and gives more money to to folks with low earnings history. So again, people that over their lifetime have earned less will get more benefits. And then a big piece here is the last one, which is healthcare. And the campaign has said things like Medicare for all. That's not what we're analyzing here. There's not enough details in that particular piece of their plan to do it. So we looked at the other things, changes to drug prices and how they're handled by Medicare and Medicaid, and then expanding access to Medicare by reducing the age from 65 to 60. And again, this has beneficial effects in the economy by making people healthier, making them more productive. The lowering costs of drug prices will also have some beneficial effects. And then there's this last piece here that they put forth that they have paid leave. This is up to 12 weeks for all workers. We don't analyze this one. Again, it's not clear how this would be handled. And so we didn't want to model it if we were making decisions about the policy when we'd rather the campaign make those decisions. So ultimately, here's the breakdown on a conventional basis of the new revenue and spending. And we've broken down the revenue into corporate, payroll, and individual income. That corporate tax is going from the current 21% rate to the 28% rate. Payroll taxes, they have what we call a donut hole tax, which I think you might have talked about with Social Security, the last one of these, where the Social Security taxes turn off when you reach a certain income level through wages. Here, they're going to turn back on at $400,000. So it's going to increase the tax rate there for those upper income folks. And then we have individual income tax increases, which are, changing the rates on the top two, changing the rates for the top two rate brackets, and then increasing capital gains taxes to ordinary income rates if you have over $1 million of income. So those are the three big revenue sources coming in here, and then the spending amounts. So, education's a big spend, pre-K, free college for folks with AGI under 100K. Those are big expenses. The infrastructure and R&D is this sort of second big piece. And then, if you look at healthcare, the additional spending on healthcare is pretty large. It's that 1.6 trillion, but there's also this reduction in costs from those prescription drugs, a reduction of 1.3 trillion. So on net, it's a lower cost, or it's not as expensive as you'd think, given the proposals that they've put forward. So here's the spending over the 10 years. So again, had the big 10-year number here, and this is how that breaks out over time. Again, some of these things are reflective of a combination of policies. So like prescription drug savings, that should be more over time as more people take advantage of it and things like that. And then prices go up. Excuse me. Again, education, things like that. The housing assistance, you'll see that it's just a steady number over those 10 years. The this is because the way that the campaign set forth their policy, they said they want to spend X number of dollars in 10 years. And so when they did that, we just made it an even number over those 10 years. If they had implemented a policy that was different, saying, we wanted to fund, say, the Housing Assistance Fund by X dollars every year, then we would have extended it on. Here, they've made it very clear, we want to spend X number of dollars in 10 years. Inside of that, infrastructure and R&D is a similar set of pieces. Some of the things extend over time, like they say they want to increase federal spending on water infrastructure by 30%. I don't remember the exact number. That we have go on forever. But then they also say things like we want to invest, $150 billion in new green technologies. Those things we would just have in the 10 years. So again, this gives you an idea of the spending per year and particular pieces of it. So what's the net effect on a conventional basis? And again, I'll kind of explain that here in a second. I think we talked about it a few months ago, the difference between sort of conventional and dynamic. But so on a conventional basis, we're looking at the net budgetary effect. So again, the increase sort of in debt here is, $2 trillion. That seems like a big number, and it is. But the important thing here is that again, the things that they're spending on are what we're going to call productive. So again, increasing spending on things like healthcare and education and infrastructure actually make the economy better as a whole. It's just how long it takes for those effects to kind of really to work in. So again, education, if you think about how long it takes for someone who gets a college degree to really be able to use that, it takes time. Certainly adding, say, free preschool, again, that makes those kids an earlier access to education. But of course, they're not going to be in the workforce for another, 15, 16, 17 years, as they age into the workforce. So, these things take time. Infrastructure, same story. So again, on a conventional basis, we're just looking at the dollars coming in and the dollars going out. On a dynamic basis, we're going to let those effects kind of feed into the model and allow for productivity boosts. Oops. So first piece, and this is something that I think I had expected to come up in the debate on the other night. It did not, which not sure what to make of, but that was interesting to say the least. So here's the effective tax rates, and this is something that the Biden campaign and the Trump administration have kind of gone back and forth on, both citing our research. Is so typically when tax people think about effective tax rates and changes, we have to handle the corporate tax in a very what might seem like a peculiar way. So when a corporate tax is imposed or it's increased, that reduces profits for the corporation. As a result, that corporation is going to pay less in dividends to shareholders, and it's also going to pay less in ultimately in wages to workers. I don't think there's an economist that would say anything other than that. Tax imposed on a business has to be borne by both shareholders and workers. There is some questions about how much burden is how the burden is split between those two groups of people. We use a 75% on shareholders and 25% on workers. The Tax Policy Center uses something slightly different. They have a little bit less on workers, so 20%. JCT has something a little bit more. But again, that's sort of an open question. We base our stuff off of Treasury, which is that 75-25 split. Though in the last few years they might have changed it. But that's where that's coming from. Now, no one thinks that that change is actually going to come through in the first year of the changes. Wages are what we call sticky, so it's hard to drop somebody's wage. So it's really over time that wage decrease or that dividend decrease would come in. And that's a question that is the economic literature has been dealing with. There's lots of papers out there. I think generally it's between 5 and 10 years. But when we present tables for things like effective tax rates and you talk about tax changes, the tax community assumes we're in a steady state. So it's the policy as of 2021. That's when this stuff would come in. But then it's assumed to be in the new steady state. And the new steady state would include those wage decreases and those shareholder dividend payout decreases. And that shows up in effective tax rate. That allows the Trump administration to say that the Biden campaign wants to raise taxes on 82% of the income distribution. Where the Biden campaign argues that that's not the case is they say, well, that's only if you include the corporate tax. And in 2021, there's no increase on folks below, say, 400K, which is sort of so what we've done, and we've done this for a couple of years, we didn't do this in response to anything Biden did, we kind of came up with this on our own, is we have two tables. We have a table that includes the corporate tax and a table that doesn't include the corporate tax. And if you look at anything where we have the conventional distribution of tax burdens, we have a toggle that lets you go back and forth. So these two slides are that toggle, and kind of jumping quickly between the two of them, you can kind of see what I'm talking about. So if you look at current law and Biden plan here in this slide, you'll see that they're identical for groups below the 95 percentile of the income distribution. And that's because here we're not distributing the corporate tax. We're only distributing the payroll and income tax increases that the Biden campaign has put forth. Those are targeted at groups at the very high income amounts above 400K. And so you don't see any change here. If we go to the corporate tax, so again, now I'm going to distribute the increase from 21 to 28% in the corporate rate to workers and shareholders. You can see that if you look at the middle quintile, we have 16.9 for current law, and we have 17.3 under Biden. So that's a tax increase. And this is where, again, both the Trump campaign and the Trump administration and the Biden campaign can make a claim that's different about the same thing. Is again, Biden's going to say the middle quintile sees no tax increase from is going to say that they have the Biden campaign is proposing tax increases for everyone in the income distribution. So again, this is a bit wonky, but I think it's something that's important, and I think something that is certainly getting talked about. Again, I expected it to be in the debate, but it was not. I expected something very different than what happened in the debate, but that's probably for a different talk. Okay, so now another piece here is that Biden campaign also, the way we've handled spending is we've put it all on one side of the ledger. We didn't do it through the tax code, but you could imagine things like housing assistance and free college to be administered through the tax code. So if you do that, and again, we just thought it was cleaner to do the revenue raisers, since we're talking about new burden of taxes, separate from spending, which can see as a relief of some of that burden separately. But we sort of got some questions, and we got some inquiries about how it would look if we included credits on or some of that spending on the tax side, how things would look different. So that's where we've updated this, and this is in an appendix to our full Biden analysis, where we've included certain things. We've included a bunch of the credits and this expansion of some of those pieces, and then you can see how that would change. So now if you look at, say, again, the middle quintile, for the Biden plan, you can see that 0.4% increase in the effective tax rate, but with major credits, it's actually a decrease of minus 0.5%. So if you put their spending policies or a good portion of them through the tax code, you'd actually see an effective tax rate to come down, ultimately for this group. You also see that some of the credits and some of the spending also benefit folks in the higher income group. So, as high up as the 0.1% there, or sorry, the 99 to 99.9% group there, does see a very tiny decrease in their effective tax rate as a result of some of those credits. So ultimately, what does the Biden plan do? So thinking again about all of these pieces together, and again, this is where I think we really added something to the discussion, is we're going to include the tax effects, we're going to include the spending effects, and in those spending effects, if it's building roads, those roads make businesses more efficient. That should increase productivity. Education spending should make workers more productive. If workers are more productive, workers should be more desirable relative to capital, and so that should result in more jobs and higher productivity from those workers and higher wages. So ultimately, what do we see? So if we think about the first 10 years, so in the this is standard 10-year budget window, we see a drag on the economy in terms of a drop in GDP and a drop in capital, and an increase in the debt held by public. So again, a small increase, but a real increase in the debt. Those are what I would say are bad things. But the average hourly wage is going up. So again, this is workers being more productive, and so workers being more productive, they should get more higher pay, and that's what's reflected there. And then working less. So higher hourly wage should lead to reduction in hours worked, given current situation. I know that I would certainly work less if I got more money and was able to adjust my hours. So again, then if we think sort of further on down the road, so if you think of 2040, so this will be the next set of 10 years after the budget window, we still see this drag on capital, but that drag on capital, again, is workers are more productive, and so there's a desirability to them preferred over, say, buying a tractor. This is partly because of that increased education. Again, workers more productive, but also there's that increase in tax on capital. So the returns on capital gains and dividends for high income folks are higher, and so that acts to reduce that capital. But GDP is no different than if we just kept current law going till 2040. So again, GDP is the same, capital's down, but hourly wage is up, and then we have less debt. So again, the model here suggests that if we kept, if we looked at the Biden campaign proposals versus current law, we'd be the same place in GDP, but we'd have lower debt, and we'd have higher hourly wage for folks. I think those are generally seen as good things. Going the next 10 years, so now we have all of this spending has really kind of kicked in, and then those spending things that Biden did in the first 10 years that turned off are now reflected, and we have higher tax revenue from the increase in taxes. We have more people from immigration, and then that extra spending has shut off. So we get now an increase in GDP, compared to what it would be under current law of just about a percentage point, so 0.8%. Again, capital is a little bit down, hourly wage is up, hours worked are the same, but debt is down by 6%. So again, these are all good outcomes. Again, capital being down is not great, but GDP is up. So I think in general we would say that that's a positive. So now we showed the sort of the distributional aspects from the conventional score, which again is just sort of running through our tax calculator and seeing those effective rates and what people are affected by the new burden, and then that's sort of the additional appendix there where we had looking at if you included some of the spending through the tax code. So here we have that same kind of concept through our dynamic model. So again, this is going to take into account all of those spending things, those tax increases, and how people feel about the Biden platform. So in general, the bluer a box is, the more that particular set of people like the Biden platform. The darker red boxes are the people that dislike the Biden platform. So kind of pick an easy one. If we look at the darkest red box there, that is the folks that are 70 years old who are in the highest quintile of the income distribution. So what are these folks? These are folks who are making quite a bit of income because they're old. These folks they're not getting a wage. They're getting income, but it's a lot of income. And it means that it's coming from capital gains and dividends. So it's coming from capital income. The Biden platform actually hits those exact people with taxes, right? So if you have lots of income and it's capital income, your current rate might be 20% on capital gains income. And now it's going to go up to 39.6 or 42, I guess, depending on your rate bracket. So that's quite a bit of a tax increase. So these people, the way they read this is they would pay $550,000 not to be under the Biden platform, right? So they would be better off if they just paid to get out of it. Here's my $550,000. I don't want to live in that world. Oops, go back one. So now picking somebody on the other side. So if I think about, let's pick, I think the biggest blue here is the sort of the 0 to 20 quintile. So again, these are lower income folks, and at age 40. So these are folks, kind of mid career, but not making a lot of money. So these people are they have, in our model, they don't have a very good productivity draw. So they're lower productivity workers, kind of reflected by being in that income distribution, and they don't have capital income. It's all wage income. And so they're going to be the ones that are benefiting the most from things like housing assistance, the Medicare costs or the healthcare costs going down. And they would pay, $80,000 to be in the Biden world. So again, these are folks saying, hey, here's my 80K, let me into that situation. So again, gives you an idea that there are some folks who very clearly would like to be in the Biden world because of the benefit. The groups that have the lighter shades are that in-between group. The younger you are, so again, here this is age at the start of the policy. So again, you have to think about this minus 20 as somebody who's going to be born in 20 years from now, so 2040. What would they like? So now those folks actually have this option value where they might get a really good productivity draw and end up in that upper income. And if they're in that upper income, then they're less likely to like the Biden platform because they are likely to have lots of capital income. So that's sort of reflected by these very low amounts here in, like, say, the 40 to 60 income and the minus 20 age. But again, that's reflective of, I think I might do really well in, say, when I'm bored and in 20 years, and I don't want to pay those high capital taxes or the high employment taxes on wages, say above 400K. So that's sort of reflective there in that group. And I think, again, this is pretty nice in that it incorporates all of these spending programs. It takes into account sort of the benefits in, GDP boost and things like that for all of these workers. And it gives you an idea of who would prefer the Biden platform. And I think by design, this shows very nicely people in the upper levels of the income distribution do not like it. It benefits largely the folks down the income distribution. I think this is the Biden campaign's design. And so I think they're successful generally in the way they designed that. So that's sort of the Biden analysis. Now I'm going to attempt to do the same thing on the Trump side. But they really haven't done, they haven't released anything nearly as detailed as the Biden campaign. And so it's hard for us to score it. They do have a list of priorities, but they're really sort of vague. And from our perspective, we would just be making the decisions on the policy, which is not the way that we want to do things. We'd rather the campaign tell us, and then we can analyze it as opposed to us making decisions on policies when that's not really our role here. So there's three things that we sort of see as big things for them. One, there's this capital gains tax cut. There's the payroll tax holiday, which I think most of you would be affected by right now, just the way that the mechanics of it work, and then infrastructure spending. So capital gains tax cut. So currently there's three tax rates for capital gains: 0, 15%, and 20%. And if you have enough income, you face that top 20%. So off the top of my head, I've just blanked on what that income level amount is. It's pretty high. So to be facing that 20%, you're doing well. You're at the high income. You're a high income folk. The Trump campaign or administration would like to change that top rate from 20 to 15 so that everyone would face that 15% rate on capital gains. So if we look at the distributional table here, the total cost of that over 10 years would be $98.6 billion. Again, that's the 10-year budget window. And you can see that there's basically no tax change for most of the income groups. That's because they just don't face the 20% rate as it is. They only face the 15%. So this tax cut would really benefit the top end, so the top 5% there. And that's you can see that in the table. If you look all the way to the right, the share of federal taxes paid, that's changing. So, the top 5% of the income there is getting that. They're reducing their share. The pie is getting smaller, right? So they're reducing their share of the federal taxes paid, and other groups are going up, right? That's just a calculation there of their share. But getting nothing there in the share of the tax change. So again, it's all benefiting that top end. So again, this is kind of the opposite of the Biden targeted groups for their tax increase. The Trump administration is saying, I'd like to lower taxes on that group, and Biden campaign is saying, I'd like to raise taxes on that same group. So the payroll tax holiday. So again, I think you're probably aware of the executive order that said that the employees from September 1st through the end of December do not have to pay their share of employment taxes. So it's a holiday here. There's nothing in the executive order, and Trump couldn't do it by executive order to just make that a real holiday. It's just this deferral. So the taxes that you're not paying now, again, I think the government stuff has been affected. Your paychecks probably went up, but at the end of the year, you're going to have to pay that taxes back on your tax return because it's just a deferral. It's just saying you don't have to remit the taxes now, but you're still liable for them at the end of the year. If that deferral was made permanent, so a holiday, this is the 10-year budget cost. So again, we're just saying that 3-month period of a holiday. So those employment taxes wouldn't have to be paid. It's 122 billion. And then here you can see the distribution of how that works. It's much more basically somebody in every income group gets a reduction in tax there. Again, this is reflective of just how many people have wages. Even folks in the top end get wages. It's not just capital income. LeBron James gets a giant big wage, and he would see some benefit here. And again, just kind of giving an idea of this is much more even across the distribution. Though I think in terms of a stimulus story of whether or not it would, kind of give a kickstart to the economy, I think it's not clear it would. I think the folks higher up the income are less likely to have lost their jobs during the current situation, the current pandemic. I think the low income workers, folks like waiters and waitresses and bartenders, folks that work in grocery stores, they're the ones more likely to lose their jobs in this situation, whereas the higher income workers are more likely to be able to do their jobs from home or remotely. And so, in terms of stimulus, I'm not sure how great this is, but this is much more of an even change across the distribution. So the last thing that we would call a Trump policy is sort of this infrastructure, which again, something we've kind of dug back into the bag to pull out here. The White House did agree to a sort of a $2 trillion infrastructure investment, but it wasn't clear on what. Is it roads? Is it something like 5G Wi-Fi or whatever it is? Roads, airports, those things. Those are all infrastructure spending. We can put those things in our model, so we just kind of have this an infrastructure effect, and so we know spending on infrastructure would lead to certain things. If the Trump administration came out and said we want to spend on something very specific, we might be able to dial that effect in better. But here it's just a general effect. So it's really an average of all the different effects. If something was slower to come online or quicker to come online, we could adjust that. There are some issues with infrastructure spending, though, and again, the way that the Trump administration kind of laid it out is, it's a partnership between the states and the federal government, and there are some leakages there. I think there's some evidence that when the federal government gives money to a state for a particular project, the state takes the money that they were going to spend on that project and puts it towards something else. And so it's not a general increase in the spending on those particular types of projects. And so there's some issues there. We kind of discuss it in brief that we put out in 2019, I guess, on this. But it does, this type of spending is, again, what I would call productive spending, where it boosts the productivity of both workers and capital. Again, if we had no roads, we wouldn't be as productive as we are. More roads makes us more productive. You could imagine something like, more trains or more airports that makes everybody get their Amazon packages just a little bit quicker. That makes us more productive. So here's sort of the effects of this. Again, on thinking about if we're funding, and again, Trump hasn't been clear on, the administration hasn't been clear on how they would do this. If it's deficit financed, so this is borrowing, here are the general effects. So again, big increase in debt on the right-hand side, though we do get some increases in that GDP, depending on the way that the money's spent in the projects that they're spent. We do get an increase in hourly wages, again, sort of in that high 2033 option there. But the other options, sort of the other results aren't as good. And again, I think this is partly because it's the deficit financed. It's rather than with any kind of revenue raiser associated with it. Here's the option if we financed it through an increase in the gas tax. And again, here's a much different result. The debt it's clearly not increased as much. If you look at that far right column, it's much lower than it was in the previous slide. GDP is much bigger, so now we're getting a boost here. So we're getting the benefit of not just pure spending here. We're getting some pay down, or is not incurring more debt, and so that doesn't have a drag on the economy. That allows that GDP to boost, and then this productivity really kind of kicks off that increase in GDP. So I know that was much shorter for the Trump campaign, but that's by necessity because they have not given us a lot to go on. But that is all I have to present. But I'm happy to talk about anything or go through any of the details or anything you guys want to talk about.
Great.
So Sophia, I don't know if you want to jump back in.
So to dive in a little closer, back on the slide, on the dynamic analysis, with like the ages and the income quintiles, someone asked if these dollar figures are per year or just one time, clarifying that would the high income retirees want to pay $500,000 per year to not live under the Biden plan? Rich, I can't hear you right now. I'm not sure if it's your microphone or if it's my computer. Hello? I still can't hear you. If anyone else can hear Rich, feel free to put it in the chat, because for all I know, it could be my speakers.
No.
Oh, there you are.
I'm back? Okay.
Yes, you're back.
Okay, so sorry. So it's a good question about the ages there and the one-time payments. So it is just a one-time payment, and the story is that, you know, if I'm 70, I have an expectation to live, say, 15 years longer. You know, again, different people will have different expectations how long they will live, but I have lots of income from capital gains. This is a very, very rich folks. These folks have $12 million and more in assets. And I will make a one-time $550,000 payment not to live in the Biden world for the rest of my life. So again, it's pretty high, but again, this is the group we're talking about, the extra taxes and whatnot they would pay. Similarly, for even the folks at the low end, so the sort of, I think about the complete opposite end, the folks that are minus 20 years old and in the low income, they would be willing to pay $78,000, again, a one-time payment to live in the Biden world.
Okay, so essentially it's like the cost of living in the Biden world as opposed to living in the baseline world?
That is a way to think about it. It's a little more nuanced than that, but I think that's fine.
Okay.
It's the trade-off to make me the same between the two worlds. So again, somebody in the 70 and the top income group, to make them indifferent between the two, it would require taking away $550,000.
Okay. I think I actually have a follow-up question about this chart. Can you explain a little more about how the negative, like the impact of the negative ages work and how that factors into the policy analysis overall?
Sure. So let's look at the top income group here. So again, the 80 to 100 and the minus 20. So who are these folks? So these are folks who either have really rich parents. So, you know, I don't know, Paris Hilton, or their parents are really productive. So the productivity draw of those folks are more likely to be high. When your productivity draw is high, you're more likely to be a high earner. When you're a high earner, you're going to pay more in taxes under the Biden policy world.
Okay.
And so what they're taking into account is how productive am I going to be? How much am I going to get in inheritance? And then what would those taxes, what would I face under Biden world? So I would, even before I was born, I know my parents are rich. I'm gonna pay $340,000 not to live in the Biden world.
Okay. Interesting. And then I actually.
So again, so then if you think about somebody in say the middle income, so again minus 20, 40 to 60, so they would pay $4,000 not to be in the Biden world, but they also are accounting for that. Hey, I might get a higher productivity draw, and be worse off under Biden, but I also might not. In which case, I'd rather live in the Biden world, and so that's that. Really, what I would call over a lifetime, a pretty small amount to pay not to live in the Biden world. That they're doing an expected payoff between the two options here, the two worlds they could potentially live in.
Okay. So another follow-up that's just from me is so one of these worlds is the Biden world, right? Like the world with Biden's policies going into action. And what is the other worlds that we're looking at? And is the pandemic factored into that world? Because I'm sure doing this analysis last year would be very different than doing it this year.
Yes, so it's the Biden world versus current law. So that is as if nothing changed. And that current law, the current world takes into account the pandemic. So the pandemic is there under both Biden and current law, but this is a comparison to current law.
Right, cool. Thank you. And someone else had a follow-up question, I think, to this discussion. They asked, how do things like health insurance factor into this calculation, and how do we value that?
Yeah, so our model actually takes that into account. So we know we forecast how much people would pay on health insurance costs for premiums and things like that. And so as the Biden plan reduces costs, so again making Medicare increasing access to Medicare by 5 years, going from 65 to 60, means that folks have 5 years less that they have to cover their own health insurance. Now, they could still enter their own and pay for their own insurance, but obviously for a lot of folks, those 5 extra years reduces costs pretty significantly. Given that, the people in our models would then take that extra money that they don't have to spend on health insurance and do other things. They might maybe get spend it on something like healthcare, maybe get glasses where they didn't have glasses before, or get LASIK surgery where they didn't before. But they also might spend it on other things like their own education, or save it for other things. And so those things all benefit those people. That extra dollars allows for additional consumption and savings by those folks that would benefit from the expanded Medicare. I see, Sophie, I see one here too that we sort of jumped over about analyze how spending hits the tax code and put it all on one side of the ledger.
Yeah, I was going to get to that one.
Okay, so yeah, I just want to clarify. So what we did is typically when we think about those conventional distributional tables, we think about the change in burden that people would face under a particular tax regime. And so here we have these revenue raisers. So people have to bear the burden of those increased costs. So on one side we have increased costs, on the other side we have benefits. And so benefits are how do you account for it? So again, education spending. Sure, some of you might have gotten a Pell Grant to go to college, or a Hope credit, things like that. Those are handled through the tax code, but they're education benefits. And so here because there are things that are very complicated in the Biden proposals, we just thought it was cleaner to say, here is the spending. We're going to put it all on this side, and we're just going to look at the burden of the increased spending. So again, increased revenues coming from somewhere. We put those on the tax code because they're very clearly changes in taxes. Spending stuff can be designed as a tax benefit. It can be designed as a pure spending, a pure transfer program. You know, there's always questions in the tax world whether to put things like, you know, SNAP payments or other welfare programs in the tax code, or just a pure transfer program. And so here, rather than make the decision for the Biden campaign, we just made what we thought was a clean one, since it was information that they didn't provide. We just said, let's do revenue raisers through the tax code because that's an increase in burden, and everything else on the spending side. We added the appendix because people were curious about, you know, like to this point, why did we do that? How would the analysis change if we did it differently? And that's why we presented that. It's really just how you would want to design the particular program, like education spending.
Okay, great. Thank you for clarifying that. I think those are all the questions we have for now, unless anyone submits any at the last minute before we sign off. But thank you so much, Rich, for this excellent presentation and this question and answer session also, which I think clarified a few things for us. As always, participants, to get credit for this, you have to fill out a feedback form on the participant content page. There will also be a video of this posted on our website for anyone that couldn't attend live today, or if you want to revisit anything, feel free to go back and look at that. And the links to both the video and the feedback form will go out later today. We've just got a few more courses left, so make sure you're meeting your requirements of 3 electives and 3 core credits. All the information you need is on the certificate program page, as well as on the participant content page, which is private to participants. Thank you again, Rich, for being our presenter today, and thank you everyone for coming. We'll see you next month.
Thanks.